Now, a couple months back, there was a bit of a controversy, you could say, when a new LEGO Star Wars set for Boba Fett's famous ship, known as the Slave One for over 40 years, was revealed, and it was called Boba Fett's Starship, instead of using that classic aforementioned name, which then alluded to a possible changing of the name. However, there were those who quickly pointed out that LEGO doesn't always use the actual or proper names for ships, that sometimes they give them generic or on the nose names like the Bad Batch Attack Shuttle instead of Havoc Marauder, because sometimes someone, say a parent, looking for just the right toy is not going to know the actual name, but they're going to be able to understand or recognize that the Bad Batch Attack Shuttle is just the ship that their son or daughter is looking for. And despite the fact that, yeah, LEGO has slapped the name Slave One on sets containing the ship before, I was still hoping that those making the claim or bringing this up were right somehow, that since the ship had recently shown up in The Mandalorian, they were trying to market it towards a whole new generation of kids who may be seeing it and loving it for the very first time, and to again make it easy for their parents to go out and find and buy the right ship. But the problem with that theory, or what some were ignoring, is that even at the time of its reveal, the head of the LEGO design team was saying that the decision to call it Boba Fett Starship came down from above, that it was a decision made by Disney. They at LEGO even went as far as to say that Slave One was a name that Disney wanted to move away from in the future, that they didn't want to use it anymore. Regardless, though, there was maybe still hope that this was just for toys, that maybe elsewhere the old name would remain the same, and we could just shake our head at how silly they were being every time we saw Boba Fett Starship on a Lego or whatever else it might be. But unfortunately, it now seems it's going to be bigger than that. It seems like it's going to be a full-on retconning or changing of the name as if it never was. Because recently some variant covers for the currently running War of the Bounty Hunter series were announced and shown off, and in the press release, Boba Fett's ship was called, are you ready for it? Fire Spray. And yes, if you know your Star Wars lore well enough, you may be quick to point out that Fire Spray is the type of ship that Slave One is, so maybe they're just referring to that for this particular comic, which might make sense or be true if the other 5 covers in this series did the same thing, and didn't use the name of the ships but the type. But that's not the case. For example, Bosk's ship is called the Houndstooth, Dengar's the Punishing One, and so on. In other words, yeah, they are implying that the name of Boba Fett's ship is now Fire Spray, that he, or should I say Jango, just named it after the type of ship it was, even though once upon a time in the expanded universe, there was a reasoning or sort of story behind the name Slave One. Though sure, if we're being honest, it originally was just a cool name George Lucas or someone else thought up for the ship without giving any real thought to a backstory. It just sounded good and fit the character, I'd imagine. But as is always the case with Star Wars, a backstory was developed later on, which is that, and not to get too deep into it, but in his younger days, Jango Fett spent years as a slave aboard a spice freighter. So when later on in his life he stole a modified Fire Spray class starship after his old ship, the Jaster's Legacy, was destroyed, he presumably named it Slave One as a sort of reminder of that dark time in his life, though full disclosure, nowhere does he expressly say why exactly he named it that way. Again, it's only presumed. And if that is the case, which I think makes sense, if he named the ship Slave One as a reminder of where he had come from and how he had escaped that life, and it's not hard to, somewhere in the new canon, sort of resurrect this backstory and even have Jango give his reasoning for the naming in the story now, well, then the ironic part about all of this with the change is that the name Slave One is actually more of a symbol of hope or freedom than anything resembling oppression, which I'm sure is what they are afraid of. It's a name chosen by a survivor of slavery to never forget the horrors of it. And so instead of Disney and Lucasfilm embracing this name and story in a time where there is certainly a lot of talk about the long-term ramifications of slavery here in the US, where there is potentially a story to be told, they jettison the name because, I don't know, they first of all probably don't know or care about the lore or history behind it, and second, they think hearing the word slave or the name Slave One will somehow be offensive or triggering or just too difficult for some people to hear. Even though, believe it or not, slave or slavery are just words that don't always have to refer to the history of slavery in a particular country, nor does liking a name of a fictional ship with the word slave in it mean you approve of slavery or have no sympathy for anyone across history who endured it, or who still endures it today, because it has not been eradicated from the world. And I know you might laugh and say, I don't need to point all this out, that only the worst of the worst among us are for slavery. That should be a given, right? But there are those who say, and they're serious somehow. Anyway, there are those that say Star Wars fans who like the name Slave One and don't want to see it changed are actually for slavery, or maybe don't think it was as terrible or horrible as it actually was. Which would then be like, trying to get equally ridiculous here, it'd be like saying that since I wouldn't want the name Death Star changed, it means I want our sun to explode and kill us all. I want it to become a literal Death Star. It's equating two things that have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Because Star Wars takes place in a fictional galaxy far, far away. Names of ships in this imaginary place cannot hurt you, I promise. In other words, no, we didn't need Disney to point out that slavery is and was bad by changing the name of a ship. Every rational and decent person today knows and believes that already. And how in the past, or in other parts of the world still today, there exists or existed people who were for it and condoned it and partook in it is almost mind-blowing to pretty much everyone today. It's crazy to think slavery was once a legal practice. And that is because we have grown and changed as a society and a people, though at the same time, we should never forget where we came from. We should never forget how terrible it was. So if you really wanted to tell a story that is somehow a reflection of our world or its history, which Disney usually seems very interested in doing, one that maybe doesn't feel quite so heavy-handed, which it usually ends up being, then I feel they badly missed the mark here. As I said before, they could have embraced the name Slave One and the story from the expanded universe that goes along with it. They could have given us a sort of canonization of the story about Jango's time as a slave and the lasting impact it had on him, so much so that he named a ship after the experience. You could have basically killed two birds with one stone. You revive parts of an old and beloved backstory for Jango, all the while explaining the name of the ship Slave One. And then you can also perhaps make some sort of point about how bad slavery was and the potential lasting impacts of it, as it could have been highlighted to some degree in the book of Boba Fett, showing how it impacted him that his father had come from this dark place once upon a time. But no, instead of telling a potentially meaningful story for both in-universe characters and for our own real world, you worried that someone might be hurt or offended by hearing the word slave. So you changed it to prove to fans how much you oppose slavery, I guess, so congrats on that, and to show how virtuous you are by protecting us from a word of all things. And I know, some of you will say or argue, who really cares? It is just the name of a fictional ship. Why do you care about this so much? Which is the exact same argument or question I'd make in return, that it's just the name of a fictional ship, so why do they need to change it? And clearly they care if they're the ones who are going to change it after 40 years of it being Slave One. But hey, maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe the name is offensive and should be changed, and I'm missing something, or I'm just being insensitive. So let me know if and why you perhaps think this is a good change, or on the flip side, if you're, say, a Black American, let me know why you don't like the change, or if you think it's a pointless gesture, or just tell me what you think about it in general. I am genuinely interested and eager to hear this from all sides. Though again, please don't just reiterate the whole what does it matter argument. Like I basically said a moment ago, it falls flat because clearly it matters to Disney, or they think it matters to others, or in the grand scheme of things. If they are going to risk the ire of the fans to change this, then clearly they think it is important. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to weigh in on this. Does this make sense? Is it a good change, or is it a pointless gesture, or worse yet, just a moronic one that does absolutely no good whatsoever and just angers fans? Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.